Oh, we are live. There you go. Told you it was quick. Hi, everybody. Very happy to welcome Jane Jesmond tonight. Bit delayed, wasn't it? We rescheduled this one. Why don't you start off while I pin our stream? Just giving the members an introduction to you and your books.
Okay. Well, hi. Hello. It's lovely to be here tonight, and I'm sorry I had to delay it last time, but I really was not very well at that point. I'm Jane Jesmond, obviously, and I write crime fiction, probably towards the thriller end of the spectrum, I'd say. I will say that I didn't really set out when I first started writing. I didn't think I would write thrillers. But I thought I'd write something far more sedate. But once I started, I couldn't resist throwing my characters into dangerous situations and watching them try to get out of them. So I've ended up very much in the crime fiction and thriller genre. And my first book, which was published a couple of years ago, is On the Edge. It's the first in a series featuring a daredevil expert climbing fanatic called Jen Shaw. And On the Edge, which is set in Cornwall in winter, it starts off in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm, one of the storms that roll in across the Atlantic every winter in Cornwall and batter the coastline. But this one, in the middle of this storm, Jen Shaw is hanging unconscious from a lighthouse while the rope that's holding her up slowly frays. Luckily, she wakes up in time, otherwise there wouldn't be very much of a book, and succeeds in climbing her way to safety. But she has no idea how she's got there. And the rest of the book is really her journey into increasing danger as she tries to uncover the mystery of how she got there. It could be that she's witnessed something illicit or illegal going on in one of the small coves that lines the Cornish coastline. Or maybe it's something from her rather ramshackle past that's come back to bite her, or even possibly a member of her slightly eccentric family is trying to kill her. Anyway, she obviously succeeds in her mission and survives the experience because she appears in book 2 of the series, which is called Cut Adrift, and which came out early last year. And in this one, Jen heads off to Malta in search of her mother, her rather new agey, hippie-ish mother, who's gone missing. And she finds her in Malta working in a refugee camp. But when one of her mother's friends, Nala, dies in a suspicious fire in the camp, it seems that someone has designs on Nala's 2 vulnerable young daughters, and that the only way Jen and her mother can rescue them is by fleeing the island on a smuggler's boat. And off she goes throughout Europe. And it ends in northern France, but there you go. I'm currently writing the 3rd Jen Shaw book, the 3rd in the series. So if I look a bit harassed, it's because I'm right in the middle of finessing all the plot points and trying to work out where everybody is, on every day, and making sure that all the threads lock together, and I've not left any plot holes that some eagle-eyed reader will write to me to draw to my attention. And my most recent book, which came out at the end of last year, which is A Quiet Contagion. Oh, I'm good at holding these up. They're A Quiet Contagion. This one, it's a standalone. It's not part of the Jen Shaw series, and it's a mystery thriller. at its heart is a secret, a terrible secret that's been kept by a group of 7 people who all worked at the same pharmaceutical laboratory in Coventry in 1957. And conspiring to hide the truth has brought success and wealth to some of them, but others have been tormented by the secret. And now, 60 years later, one of them has decided to reveal the truth with obviously disastrous consequences. The book has a dual timeline. Part of it is set in the pharmaceutical lab in Coventry in 1957 against the backdrop of a polio epidemic. But the bulk of the book is set in 2017 and concerns Feeney, a young nurse whose world is turned upside down when her grandfather, Wilf, jumps to his death off a railway bridge. Neither Feeney nor her grandfather's widow, Dora, know why he's done this. And they set out to find out, and very quickly realise that it's linked back to the pharmaceutical lab in 1957, where Wilf worked as a 15, 16-year-old for a few months. And the rest of the book is really about them uncovering the secret. You know, a few additional bodies litter the way, as is common. And but for me, I think one of the big questions was, once they'd found the secret, what were they going to do with the knowledge? And that's where I am at the moment.
That was a good description. So we've got some hellos coming in while you were doing your introduction. So Sam has said hello. Ruth Botham has said hello.
Okay. Yes.
That sounded like you know Ruth.
I do know Ruth. Hi, Ruth.
And Donna has said hello as well. She's very happy that the autocrats are back. Which is good. So it's nice to have some people watching.
It's lovely, yes.
What inspired you? Because you said you wrote, before we went live, you were saying you started writing Quiet Contagion. You came up with the idea, it was before the pandemic. What kind of made you want to write about something?
Okay, well, this is going to be quite a long answer, I'm afraid.
That's
okay,
fine.
so A Quiet Contagion actually started out life because initially I wanted to write a book about a secret and a conspiracy, and about a book that had followed, that had to a certain extent followed how keeping the secret had affected the lives of a group of people. But initially, I did really want to write that, but I was very nervous about writing it, first of all, because it meant I was going to have to set part of the book in the past, if you like. And I'd never written any kind of historical fiction before, and I was daunted by the thought of getting that right. And so I had slightly shelved it initially. And then I was in Coventry, which is where my sister lives, so I know it quite well. And I went around one of the local museums that has a fantastic exhibition of social history in Coventry. And so, I worked through the Middle Ages and the Second World War and the bombing of Coventry. And then I came to the bit which dealt with the 50s, 60s, and so on. And, I'm obviously not super young. And I was actually quite startled because I was surrounded by things I remembered from my youth and childhood. There was a mangle, and I can remember my mother mangling the water out of the clothes in our garage when I was a child. There was a tease made, just all sorts of objects that reminded me very much of my childhood. And okay, so I was quite taken aback, really, that my youth was considered as history. But what it did make me realise was that I could actually write about the 1950s and the 1960s and feel, and oh, there's the cat, I'm really sorry, but I'm just going to have to let her out. I'll be back. I really will be, like, half a second.
You don't get these author chats when you do them at bookstores.
I'm really sorry, but I tried to throw her out before. Anyway, and so then I thought, okay, I am going to write this novel, and I'm going to set it in 1950s Coventry. Also, or set that strand of it, it started off in Coventry in the 1950s. Now, also in this museum, which was the Herbert Museum, if anybody from Coventry is listening or watching at any point, they had a miniature iron lung, which again, I don't know how much you all know about polio, but at its very worst, it can paralyze your breathing. And the only way you can breathe is to be put encased in essentially what looks like an iron barrel that, by changing the pressure inside the barrel, pulls your rib cage and you're in and out and does the breathing for you. And a lot of them were manufactured in Coventry because it was a sort of it was something that a lot of the car manufacturers did as well. So I'd got this idea of doing Coventry, and I'd seen I'd had my memory jogged, if you like, by seeing the iron lung in Coventry Museum. And I thought back to the polio epidemics because, again, it's something that sort of faded from consciousness, public consciousness, I think, now. But in the early part of the 20th century, great polio epidemics swept a lot of the major cities in Europe and in North America every summer. And they were, they were terrifying things. Children were kept indoors, and if you caught it as a child, you'd be whipped off to an isolation ward, and often, you wouldn't see your parents for months on end, or weeks certainly, because you were kept shut away from everybody. And I just, it's just, I do find the whole medical side of it really interesting. And so I started researching polio, the medical research and all of that, and very quickly came across the 1957 polio epidemic in Coventry, which in itself was a particularly poignant one, because of course by then the vaccine against polio did exist. It was just so complicated to make that it was in very short supply. And so Coventry was in the middle of a polio epidemic while the solution to it was actually around. And really from that point on, I knew that part of the book, that the backdrop for that part of my book was going to be that epidemic. But have I answered the question? Yeah, I think I probably have. But anyway, I am just going to go on to say it wasn't inspired at all by COVID. I actually started writing the book early in 2019, and I'd written at least 2, if not 3 drafts by the time COVID came along. And I edited it on and off during COVID, and I tried very hard not to change things in retrospect because of, and try and draw too many parallels, because there really wasn't the point of the book. And then after I'd finished, I actually sat on it for a while, because I just felt no one really wanted to read anything about illness and epidemics by that point for quite a while.
I think there was a bit of a mix. There were some people who, during lockdown, when we were doing these things, absolutely didn't want to know anything about any of it. And then there were some people who read so much about, like, plagues and pandemics and books with illnesses in and things as part of, like, their way of dealing with it. There was a bit of a mixture of the two.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. When we all deal with things in our in our own ways. I personally, yeah, I don't know. I think it's. I think you see if it. I think we need to put a bit of space between, or we needed to put a bit of space and get back to normal before we could really start to think about illness and read about illness again. I did anyway. Yeah. I was just desperate for it to be over. I absolutely loathed being, confined. Really, I mean, I understood why we had to do it, but it was not an easy experience at all. You know, and I live somewhere where it's easy to get outside. So, yeah.
We've got a few more comments. So Karen has said hello. Donna has said a random fact: she won a copy of On the Edge 3 times.
Oh, did she?
Yeah. The most she's ever won a copy of a single book one time was to put a picture of a book or picture of the book on the edge or something, and she put it with a U2 guitarist.
Oh, yes, I remember that. I do remember that. Yeah.
Nicola
has read all 3.
I hope so. I mean, they sound great. I'm going to go back and source those. Like once you were describing them, I was like, I'm going to add that.
Okay. I loved writing A Quiet Contagion. I loved writing it, but a lot of that was to do with the research. Because there's a lot of other stuff in it apart from just the polio epidemic. And I also really loved writing all the different characters' points of views. That was very special, being able to do that. But I also love writing the Jen Shaw series, partly because of all the chases and the danger and working out how to escape from it and just all of that aspect. So I hope you enjoy it when you come to them.
Nicola Hughes has said hello from Coventry.
I know Nicola.
Fun. Another random fact, not as fun as Donna's though. When I was at university, one of my labs was actually building cardboard models of viruses, and we built the polio virus.
Oh, did you? Oh, so do you know lots and lots about it?
We built polio and the herpes virus.
Yes. Okay, because I mean the polio virus. I don't want anyone to think that this book is all about polio, because it isn't.
No, it isn't.
I did do a huge amount of research, and it's only tiniest little bit of it that actually appears in the book. But I mean, it's a very interesting virus because my understanding is it's so small that's one of the problems with the manufacture of the vaccine, because the actual live polio virus escapes through some of the filters, which is why which is a problem. I have to be very careful not to give anything away, obviously.
Tasha has said it's her first time ever catching a live author chat and has joined us.
Okay.
Hello. You're right in saying that the polio is not the main kind of feature. It's kind of important to the story without giving any, because I don't want to give anything away.
No, please don't.
But it was a really interesting book to read, and I liked how you told it through the stories of the different characters. So you got the 2 timelines, but you also got different people's experiences in those timelines, which I thought was really interesting. It must have been quite hard to kind of keep all those threads apart.
It was. I wrote a first draft. I mean, I always do this with the first draft. I just start at the beginning and I write it through to the end. However, I think in the order that I think it's going to appear in the book, which is not necessarily chronological order. But thereafter, I tended to write. I'd spend a month or so writing the historical strand, the strand that starts in 1957, and then I'd go back and I'd write the 2017 strand, and I think that helped that helped quite a lot to keep them fairly clear in my head. They're also written quite differently because the Feeney, the 2017 section is all written in the first person, whereas the 1957 and onwards section, which has got a lot of different points of view, a lot of different characters from whose point of view I write. I wrote that in the third person, and again, I found that was quite helpful in keeping everything a bit more distinct, in my own mind, and hopefully in the reader's mind too. But it was the characters who were most important to me in that book, and some of them just came to me and came to life almost immediately when I was writing them. Others, I mean, I do, even if a character's kind of sprung into life in my head immediately, which happens sometimes, I do spend a lot of time actually working with the characters. I'll write a life history for them, even for the parts that don't appear in the book, and I've got a whole series of sort of interview questions that I ask them, which is just all sort of exercises to try and make them come alive for me. And yeah,
it works really well. Because I thought the standout thing for me about the book was the interaction of all the characters.
Yeah,
the kind of incident that the secret that they're keeping has kind of changed them over time, and like they were all really believable. Like all their responses to it were very.
Oh, that is so.
You're reading real people, sort of handling all of the things, because they weren't all handling it brilliantly, but then you wouldn't if it was a real.
No, I mean, okay, obviously I write in a crime fiction and thriller, on one level it's not really very realistic at all, and thank heavens it isn't really very realistic. But I do think it is very important to me that the plot comes out of the characters, or that the characters are reacting to what's going on in a believable way, that the action is rooted in the people themselves. It's I do spend quite a lot of time trying to, despite the fact that it's obviously hopefully not likely going to happen, to try and give the characters some believability.
Yeah, I think you would really get that with like Feeney and Dora, because they're quite a fractious relationship, don't they? And that feels like so like realistic.
To be honest with you, I can't take any credit for that, because though there were aspects of Feeney and aspects of Dora that I did have to work on, but their relationship I just knew what it was. I knew that sort of slightly, they're both very, really nice people, but there's a bit of a personality clash. They don't understand each other. It's a tricky relationship because Dora is Feeney's step-grandmother, and I think that does add a complication to a family relationship. And they're both sort of dealing with it as best they can, but it is. I mean, sometimes I have to say they did make me laugh sometimes when but yeah. But I think but lots of people's relationships are like that. Not lots of people have relationships that are neither absolutely marvelous or absolutely terrible, but they have their good moments and their bad moments, and yeah.
But I think when you see that reflected in a book, it makes characters more human.
Well, good. That's what I hope too.
Ruth said that you've not mentioned the book that she's reading, Her.
Yes. Oh, I haven't mentioned that, but partly because it's so difficult to talk about. But I have it here. her. That is another standalone. It's probably more of a psychological thriller than my other books, and it's got. This is the trick. It has got quite a big speculative fiction twist in it. It's about. Okay, so it's the central character is a lady called Lucy who runs a mask workshop in Greenwich, and she has a flatmate. She rents a room out above the shop to Elizabeth, who seems to have the most perfect life, to be perfectly good looking in every way. And something happens fairly early on in the book that means that makes their lives fairly inextricably linked. And Lucy very soon finds out that Elizabeth is not at all what she thought she was. And but by that point, it's extremely difficult for her to unlink herself, which I'm sorry to sound so mysterious. But it's yes. If you like a thriller with a speculative twist, I think you might enjoy it. Is Ruth enjoying it?
I don't. Oh, well, we'll hear. Hopefully, I really do actually. I quite like crime with a speculative twist.
But you can understand why it's so hard to talk about, because if I am going to really explain it, I'm going to have to give the speculative twist away. And
yeah, you can't. No, it's absolutely.
I just think it spoils it, for the reader. But anyway, it's about two women, Lucy and Elizabeth, and both have fairly checkered histories, and you gradually discover this as the book proceeds. And
Ruth says yes.
Oh, good.
It's better. Oh, I don't know if that's giving anything away. She says it's better than The Tourist.
It's better than The Tourist. Okay. Okay. No, I don't know. The speculative twist is not. I don't think the sport. No, I do know the Tourist is about the chap who can't remember, who's got amnesia, isn't it? I haven't seen it. It's not like that, but anyway, I'm glad it's better than The Tourist.
Donna has asked what the saddest or most shocking thing you learned during your research is.
I think during my research into polio and quiet contagion, the treatment of so polio is a disease that affects mainly children, or that used to affect mainly children before vaccination effectively has eradicated it, certainly in the Western world, not so much in the developed world, was the experiences of the children who caught it. Often whisked off, all of a sudden, we're talking about 2 or 3 year olds here, whisked off into hospital, in pain, not able to move. I don't think the nurses were always as kind to them in the early part of the 20th century as maybe they would be now. Unable to see their parents, and then you see many of them stayed in hospital for years while they were sort of, once they'd recovered, to help them to walk again. Polio often affects the legs. It shrivels. It leaves you with shriveled and undeveloped muscles. So children have to learn to walk in things called calipers, which are a sort of splint, if you like, that's strapped to the body by leather straps, which holds your leg rigid, and you sort of unlock it so that you can bend your leg when you want to sit down. And so, a lot of that was I found quite hard to read about. Some of the kids' experiences were pretty shocking. And then some of But I think the single most shocking thing I read was when I was doing some research, just generally into medical research and medical discoveries. Now I might have some of the details of this wrong, but essentially, in the early days of the smallpox vaccine, pharmacists used to keep a cow somewhere on the premises, a cow that had cowpox, and they used to like scrape the cowpox essentially off the cow and use that, and the smallpox, vaccine was manufactured from that. It's like that I found very very unpleasant to read about. So there you go. So there's some examples of horrible things I've had to research.
It's on the bigger end of viruses as well, the smallpox virus.
Oh, is it? Didn't do so much research into that one. But the whole polio story, if anyone is listening who doesn't know it, in itself, I mean, not talking about my book, but in itself, the whole story of how polio suddenly became a problem in the late 1930s, 20th centuries with these massive polio epidemics. How really in America, the March of the Dime, which was a charitable association that was set up to look after polio sufferers and also to fund research, how that operated. How the race for the vaccines, because there were 2 polio vaccines, all of that, it's an absolutely riveting story in itself.
It really is. I think some of the reasons why it's still hard to not eradicate in the developing world is because the most effective vaccine is essentially live is a bad word with viruses, but a live kind of attenuated vaccine so it's not infectious, but it's still the main thing. But then that's really hard to store, and they can't travel it to places that have like the less effective one to use.
Yeah. No, it is still a problem in in other parts of the world. And even who knows? I mean, we've just the whole vaccine thing is. I don't know if I really want to get too much into this because it's quite we've had, it's quite political, but we've had the recent measles outbreak it's Birmingham, I think that suffered worse, but whatever, where some frightening percentage of children aren't vaccinated against it. And I can't help thinking it's because people have forgotten just how vicious some of these childhood diseases can be. And how because measles can cause can make you very ill and cause blindness, I think. Anyway, it's obviously very current at the moment, the whole vaccine argument.
It's a ridiculously bad illness, measles, isn't it? I couldn't have the measles vaccine when I was little because it was made in something I was allergic to.
Yeah.
I actually caught measles and was in hospital for quite a long time.
Oh, well, absolutely. Well, there you go. When I was a child, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine didn't exist, and I had measles. I didn't have it badly, but enough to, my parents were very worried when I caught it. And whereas when I got chickenpox, they were keen for my brother and sister to get it too and get it over and done with. With measles, I remember being kept apart from them because it just wasn't something you catch. No, it's and I mean some of that discussion is present in A Quiet Contagion, she says, without wishing to give anything away.
No, without giving. I think that's the interesting thing, isn't it? And I think without giving things away, what you talk about in the book, rather than the science of it, is as much like the kind of responsibilities of things like pharmaceutical labs and companies and things like that. And I think whatever you think about science or understand about science and vaccines, kind of that kind of thing is worth knowing about and thinking about.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, I think it's really important to know as much as you can about all these things that are, that are going on. You can't, well, again, I don't want to say, you can't necessarily trust big companies, governments. I don't want to sound like I'm some kind of paranoid, but you can't always trust people's motivations. I've obviously got the post office scandal running around my head at the moment. I mean, I'm sure someone's going to write a book about, so that's got some, that's got corporate responsibility and corporate behavior at its heart. But yes, I enjoy doing the research. I enjoy finding out about things. And, I just wish people sometimes were a bit more curious and asked a few more questions about matters.
Me too. And Donna's agreed with us. She says exactly that. She loves learning when she reads, but when it's important stuff, it's what a better way than to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do, and that's another thing. I mean, okay, obviously I write fiction, but so I will invent things. The Quiet Contagion set in Coventry, but parts of it don't exist. Parts of places don't exist. But if I'm writing about the whole polio stuff and all of the rest of the illness and bits and pieces like that appear in the book, if I was inaccurate about anything like that, I'd make sure it was really clear at the end of the book, because I think otherwise people can get hold of the wrong end of the. They'll finish the book and they might have, if I've written something that's inaccurate, or they might go away believing that it is accurate. So I think you have to try and be as accurate as possible with those sorts of details.
If I remember rightly, because I did read this initially before Christmas, the book, so
yeah,
bearing with my memory back to that, you did actually mention that museum though, because I'm sure they go.
Yes.
And when you mentioned the name of the museum, I was like, I am sure they go there, and I'm sure they talk about that exhibit.
Yeah. Well, in fact, that same day, I also went to the cathedral, which I also, a very important scene in the book takes place in the cathedral. And again, I do love to incorporate real places, and the setting. The settings, the places are really important to me. I like to think that, I mean, for me, the setting, if you like, is almost an additional character. But I also like to think that, if I was to take the action of one of my books and move it, if I was to take, for instance, On the Edge, which is terribly Cornish, real Cornwall, not touristy Cornwall, it's very Cornish in many ways. I think, if I'd taken that book, and if I'd set it, well, obviously you couldn't set it in Coventry because they don't have any lighthouses in Coventry. But if I'd set it somewhere, say on the Yorkshire coast, it would have been a different book, because I think the setting has an effect on the characters and on the plot, and it's got its part to play. And I love that aspect of it too.
On the Edge really intrigued me, because I think you're sort of talking about starting at a lighthouse as well, and I think there's something really interesting about lighthouses in fiction, where they just feel like adventures are going to happen there.
Well, funnily enough, okay, so all books, well, from my perspective anyway, in my experience anyway, all of my books have started off from something. It's been a very different something in each case. So as I said, A Quiet Contagion started off because I wanted to write a book about a secret, let's say. But On the Edge started off because, okay, I live in Brittany, in France. It's very similar to Cornwall. I live right on the coast, and it's an extremely dangerous coast. If anybody who's listening has heard of the Amoco Cadiz oil tanker disaster that happened just up the road from me, which was, the area was flooded with oil. But anyway, that's beside the point. And so obviously there are lots and lots of lighthouses around my way. And there's one particularly stunning example called the St. Matthew Lighthouse. And funny enough, I was driving home late one night and I drove past the lighthouse, and there were no other lights apart from its beam just going round and round and round. It's one of the few lighthouses that has a full 360-degree turn. And I sort of stopped and had a look at it, thinking, "Oh, this is just fantastic." And it was at that point I thought, wouldn't it be great if a book opened at a lighthouse with someone hanging off it? that was the start point for On the Edge. The rest of it, Jen and the rest of it all followed on from that. But you're right; they are incredibly symbolic things, and symbolic of safety and of warning mariners, and also, in themselves, give them the sort of isolation of many of the men who used to have to live in the ones at sea. That in itself is an interesting setting for a story. So yeah, I love it.
You're saying you had kind of like a history of characters and you'd almost got interview questions about them. Yeah. Sarah's asking how you kind of keep notes about your book. Like, where do you keep all those sort of notes that you've generated?
Okay, so I'm not the most organized of writers. I know lots of people have huge, kind of Excel spreadsheets and things like that. And I do a certain amount of that because I've trained myself over the years to become a bit more organized. But for the characters, I just have this is really mundane, but never mind. I just have a directory with the name of the book, which has a subdirectory characters, and then I have a Word document about each character, and that will contain it might well contain a picture, because sometimes I like to explore. I go searching through the internet and see if I can find a picture that looks like I think the character looks, or that somehow embodies some physical aspect of the character. So it might just be someone in action, so I've got lots of pictures for Jen of people climbing. I'm not so sure I'm not so bothered about what she actually looks like. And then there'll be a life history in more or less detail according to how important the actual character is, most of which won't appear in the book, but I don't mind. I enjoy writing that sort of thing. And then, as I said, I've got all these questions, and I won't make each character answer every question. It's only I sort of go through them and see if something comes to mind, and so I'll have a note of all of those, all of the relevant answers. But I don't always spend a lot of time going back over it. It's almost as though it's the process of doing that enough of it stays with me so that I can write about them as if they were real people. And also the other thing I also do is I try and let every character have a secret that doesn't appear in the book. And there's just something about that makes them, that for me makes them come alive in my head. A bit weird, but
I would imagine those kind of notes or the life history or the kind of questions that you've written down about them might be like kind of fun things to share with like your readers groups and things as well.
Possibly, yes. To be honest, I haven't been. Okay, so I write a first draft, whiz all the way through. Okay, so I try and write some kind of synopsis before I start writing a book. I'm not very good at it. I hate doing it, but it does get me a bit more organized before I start. And then I write a first draft, and I just start at the beginning and I write all the way through, and I let myself write whatever I want. I just go for it. And if I try not to edit myself as I go, just do it. And then I write a second draft, which tends to be really plot focused, making sure the plot works and the structure works and all that sort of thing. Do that, and then at the third draft stage, that's when I know who all the characters are, and that's when I do all the character work, and just helps me develop all their different threads. But after that point, I probably don't go back and look at the notes I've made. I don't know I've forgotten what the question was.
Don't worry about it.
I'm so lost talking about the characters, but I think what I'm sort of saying is they're not necessarily, well, they might be, there's probably bits of them that are quite interesting, and there's no secrets about them, except I won't tell you what their own personal secret is, because somehow that would spoil it for me. And I've got some fun out of it too. Sorry.
One of my favorite questions to ask any author that comes on is, what kind of things have you been reading recently that you've really enjoyed?
What kind of things?
What was your read of last year, maybe?
Say that again.
What was your top read of last year, maybe, if you haven't?
My top read of last year. Well, obviously, I finally got around to read. I read Lessons in Chemistry last year, and I loved that. Also, what did I read? What did I read last year? What did I read last year in particular? I can't remember. I honestly can't remember if I read this last year or the year before. But I think the book I've enjoyed most recently was Fear and Lovely by, I'm so terrible with names, by it's something like Anjar something, and her second name begins with an A. I'm really sorry. I should have known you were going to ask me this question and planned for it. But I love that book. It was set in New Delhi. It's part crime, in that something has happened, and a lot of the book you spend a lot of the time in the book discovering what it is. But it was the characters in it. They were just fantastic. So Fear and Lovely. I can't remember the author, but her names both begin with A, and I love that book. Apart from that, I do reread quite a lot of my old favorites. I said, I wasn't very well before Christmas, and I sort of sat in bed and read a lot of Georgette Heyer and Agatha Christie, and they're strongly recommended, especially when you're not feeling very well. Is that enough?
That's great. I recently read a book called The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex, I think, which is about 3 people go missing from a lighthouse.
I've read that. It's a great book.
It was absolutely amazing. When you were talking about people on lighthouses, my mind was there.
I think I was actually thinking of that book when I made that comment, because it is all about these people who are totally isolated on a lighthouse. And then there's another lighthouse book. Oh, I can't remember it. Never mind. If I remember it, I'll put it on the Facebook page. That's it's something like The Light Between Us. I can't remember. I'll post it on that's also set in a lighthouse and is really fantastic. It was really, really, really good.
So, Sarah says, who's your favourite crime author? That's a tricky one. That's
a really awful question.
I wouldn't want to be
I don't have a favourite,
to be honest.
I don't have a favourite. I think of the kind of old school crime, like people I read when I was a lot younger, probably P.D. James. although I've a huge soft spot for Agatha Christie as well. I mean, obviously Val McDermott is a fantastic writer. I don't really have a favorite writer. And I don't just read crime either. You know, I although I write in that genre, I love all genres really, very much so. Yeah.
Excellent. As you've not been on with us before, we can ask you all our favourite group questions as well.
Oh no.
They're nice, I promise.
Okay.
Well, we'll try to be nice. Have you ever acted out a scene to help you write?
Oh, all the time. Okay, I do a lot of all right. Until I actually was published, I used to do a lot of amateur dramatics, and I think it's a great training for writing books, because you know you have to immerse yourself in a character and you know, and think like them and be like them, which is essentially a large part of what writing is like. So yes, I often do pace up and down the room, sort of, if you like, or go for a walk and effectively imagine I'm the character and imagine what it feels like and what's happening. And also, I mean, on a very practical level, I've acted out things like, you know, how many children can you hide in a car? And things like that. So yeah, I do. I think, you know, a lot of people think I'm, you know, I try and do it without too many people watching on when I'm doing it, you know, pounding around, going for a walk, you know, imagining how Jen is climbing her way out of some dangerous exploit.
How many children can you hide in a car?
You
a question that needed answering.
Well, I tell you, the best place to hide a child. Well, this is going to give something away, but anyway, I realise the best place to hide it if you have a passenger. Okay, so you put the child in the floor well in the front of the passenger seat, and then put somebody, preferably with a long skirt on top of them, and it's very hard to see a smaller child underneath them.
Excellent.
Yeah, if anybody ever wants to know, if you ever want to smuggle a child out of the country, that I reckon is the way to do it. Although, mind you, they quite often, when you go on the ferry, they do make you all get out of the car, so that wouldn't work quite so well. Luckily, that wasn't the situation I was in. But yeah. And I also spent an awful lot of time for A Quiet Contagion researching how to break open a door. And I was really tempted to have a go at one of our doors to see if I could do it at that point, but I haven't. I did go and look at it very hard, and you know, I'd kind of acted it out.
There were Richard Feynman, famous physicist. He used to like cracking open doors and safes and things.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, I did it all the time in places like Los Alamos when they were doing like the atom bomb project. He'd crack into like safes.
Okay. Oh, there you go.
I'm a mine of useless information. It's
No, I know, but it is. But all these things are really interesting, and people do really odd, sort of random things, and you know, people are just really interesting like that.
I think so. Your most memorable moments as an author?
Okay. My most memorable moments as an author. Well, okay, there was the moment. Okay, I'm sure I'm not the first author to share this with you, but I wrote for an awfully long time before I got published. And so obviously one of my most memorable moments was actually sitting where I am now and receiving an email from Verve, who are my publisher, saying that, you know, they were interested in On the Edge, and, you know, would I like to talk to them about it? So that was very memorable. I was cut adrift at the end of last year. Was the Times said it was one of the 12 best thrillers of 2023. So that was a pretty special moment. But I think possibly the thing that kind of got me most of all was the first time somebody who had read one of my books sent me an email to tell me how much they'd liked it. I mean, this is somebody who I didn't know, so that was pretty memorable.
Well, yeah, the people you do know have to say they like it, don't they?
Well, I just never asked them. I don't want to put them on the spot, you know.
Who reads your books first?
My sister. My sister, bless her. She's read everything that I've written in it in some kind of early draft form. And yeah, she's great. She's really useful. She's really helpful. She's normally really quite nice about it, but she does tell me when she's got completely confused, which is always good to know, or when she's found it really boring, which is equally good to know. Which is really the sort of two things you most want to know when you're writing. Is this boring? And can someone actually work out what's happening?
Yeah, and having some people that you trust to be those first readers must really help.
Yeah, I mean, she's not a writer herself, but as a, you know, it's great. It's great. It's what I need. I can be very confusing.
We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left.
Good heavens, yeah.
The time has flown. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, well, I've really enjoyed it too.
Remind everyone, if they've joined us like halfway through, what they will be going away to buy.
You will be going away to buy my most recent book, maybe, A Quiet Contagion, which is a mystery thriller set partly in 1957 in a pharmaceutical lab and partly in 2017 when the repercussions of what happened in that pharmaceutical lab start to make themselves felt. Or you might prefer to buy one of the first two. Oh, why can't I? I'm obviously either On the Edge or Cut Adrift, which are the first 2 books in my Jen Shaw series, featuring Jen Shaw, intrepid, daredevil, risk-loving climbing expert who's endlessly having to escape from great danger.
Excellent. Donna says, or we could all just go and beat up Donna for one of her many copies of On the Edge.
Or you could send an email, or you could get hold of Donna and ask her. I'm very happy for her to give away 2 of her 3 copies of On the Edge.
Donna's fabulous. She says she is definitely, this is a comment from Donna actually, she says she is definitely buying A Quiet Contagion.
Okay, good. That's right. Yeah, well, tell her to let me know if she
enjoys way about her, Donna, so I think she'll enjoy A Quiet Contagion.
Okay, well, please, Donna, let me know if you enjoy it and tell all your friends if you enjoy it. If you don't, just keep quiet.
That's the best way to sort of sum that up. That's the most honest author, like, just like,
not all books are for everybody. You know, for every book that's written, there will be people who love it and people who really hate it. You know, it's sort of the name of the game.
It is, but if you've got people like the Times putting your books out as a recommendation, that's a really good sign that you're doing something right.
Well, it was, you know, I have to say, after years, you know, you're endlessly plagued by doubt demons when you're writing. And so, you know, it's just nice to have that to sort of hold on to every now and again when, you know, when, like at this moment, I'm thinking, will this plot ever hang together?
And the answer is yes.
I hope so. Well, normally, eventually they do.
And then all that's left for me to say is thanks so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, I've really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for having me. Thank you, everybody.